All right, I have a very special guest with me today. And I was gonna have some big introduction, but it's my daughter Mia. And for any of you who know me, you know I'm giddy because she's my favorite human in the world. But there's actually a reason she's here, not just so you can hear us chat. Mia went through a really significant reinvention last year, and we're going to talk about it because I realized as we've sort of been looking in the rearview mirror together as she was home for summer break, she's going to her junior year at college. And we were talking about it, and I realized that there was a really, really powerful lesson in there about what reinvention means and how our vision of who we want to be in the future and who we don't want to be impacts the choices that we make. So that's why I asked Mia to join me. And this is always really fun for me. And I hope this is going to be fun and interesting for you. Mia, welcome to Reinventability.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Mia's on all my podcasts and all my masterclasses and all my Zooms. And
I like
even
being
some of my,
featured.
yes, all my books are dedicated to Mia and my awesome human journal. So Mia is part of my journey in many ways. Okay, so let's jump in because you went through a really significant, I would say, internal and external reinvention last year. And I would love for you to share that with me and our listeners. So tell us what happened.
So, my second semester of my freshman year in college, so that was not this past spring, but the one before that. I was taking hard classes, but then they really kicked my butt. And I was taking, in particular, this chemistry class that it was hard. Like, it was difficult. So I'm not saying that, like, it wasn't a hard class, but I just didn't do how I wanted to do. And I'm always someone who, like, has gotten grades that I feel like reflect what I want them to be, B, what I think they should be based on my effort. And this was like the first time that I feel like I got a grade where I was like, I feel like I put so much more effort into this class than what is sitting in front of me right now.
And let's just, since, this is you, me, and lots of thousands of people, but we try to keep it really direct here. You've always been kind of an A student.
Yeah.
And what'd you get? You didn't get an A. What'd
got
you
B
get?
minus.
Got a B minus, which was the lowest grade you've ever gotten, like, for a class. And
Yes.
you're a pre-med major, and chemistry is an important class. So, I'm always the mom who tries to put things into perspective, right? And Mia can support me on this. Like, grades are not everything. They're not the measure. But this was a bit of a big deal for a pre-med major.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so obviously initially I'm like super upset about this grade. I'm like, okay, this doesn't look good. It tanked my GPA. I didn't do great in my other classes either. So it was just sort of like this is not, like, on the surface on my transcript, like, this is not good. But much deeper than that, I was now so unhappy because I was like, I put so much into this and it didn't come back out. And I don't really know what to do about that. Freaked out a little bit, did a whole whatever.
Well, let's just pause there because I think this is actually an important piece. And I have the benefit of having been part of this. You really freaked out.
Yeah.
In fact, Papa and I have never seen you that freaked out about something. So it was just to reflect, and you've heard me say this, but this was for me the first time that I saw your confidence really shaken and your kind of being in this place of, this is awful, I'm terrible, this is awful. And like, you weren't usually like, you're pretty good at, okay, here's what I'm going to do, but you weren't in that. And I think it's really important to just acknowledge that, because I think that is such an important part of growth that we often skip over. When we tell these stories, we're like, yeah, something bad happened, I learned my lesson, I got better. But before they learn the lesson, there was this really, really uncomfortable place, terrible place that you were in. And I want to just acknowledge that, because you didn't stay there. So then what?
I want to go back before we move from the terrible place. I also wanted to, like, just as I'm thinking about it, I also, as the semester was going on, before I even got this grade, like, I knew that what I was doing, like, I was like, this isn't working. Like, this isn't working for me. And that whole semester just kept getting worse. Like, it was just sort of like, it continued to sort of be like, I don't know how to, and it's like this classic sort of transition into college. I think I was just thrown because it wasn't my first semester. It was my second. It was like, I've already been here. I should know what I'm doing. I should know, like, I got fine grades last semester. Like, why am I not able to handle this? And I think that was a big part of the confidence thing. It was like, I should know how to do this by now. Like, I was supposed to like mess up in the fall, not in the spring. And then obviously then I get the grades back and I sort of continue to be like, I have no idea what to do about this. And like, I'm about to go into my sophomore year and it's like, oh, well, freshman year, they sort of like forgive your GPA a little bit when you go to med school. Sophomore year, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix it. I actually don't know how to pinpoint like when my perspective shifted. I think it was when we had a conversation like at the end of August before I went back to go to sophomore year. I remember us having a conversation about like changing how you look at things, like not complaining as much about like, oh, bad professors or this or that or whatever, and more like, okay, this thing is bad. What can I do to make it work for me? And for whatever reason, like that conversation, we'd had that conversation before, but I think for just with like contextually how everything was going, it hit me. I was like, and then that was when the shift started. And then that was when I went into my sophomore fall. And like, yeah, not everything's going to be perfect. This professor was whatever, I don't remember specifics, but like, you know, professors are teaching in ways that don't necessarily work for me. But I started to be like, how do I make it work for me, even if it's not given to me in a way that works for me?
Before we go into that, you said something about this to me before that I want you to say on the air about your friend Delia and you
Oh, yeah.
realizing a really big thing that had to do with the future you didn't want to be or wanted to be.
It was how I was saying that my friend Delia, she said to me, this was actually recent. She said to me that she was like, no, I'm making a conscious decision to not like throw my entire self into my finals. It doesn't really matter to me whether I get a B plus or a B in this class. Like that's the effort it would take isn't worth it to me. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, yeah. Like that's what you do. You consciously decide like how much of my energy is going to go into this class or this club or this other thing. Like, how am I going to split my time? What's most important to me? How do I arrange myself internally and externally so that I can put myself into what I want to get from it?
And so when we were talking about it, you said that, you know, for you, you want to go to medical school. That's really important to you. Like we were even saying, like your future self is successfully gets into a great medical school. And so actually becoming intentionally aware of that, like this is what's important to me. This is what I want. What did it help you do in terms of prioritizing?
I mean, I think it sort of helped me recognize like, okay, grades are super important. They're actually not the end all be all. They want to see, you know, more than just a straight A student. However, they need to be incredibly important. I think I sort of realized like how I started to think about how do I split my time in a way that I am going to get the grades I want, but I'm also not going to lose those other parts of me and the other things I do that A, I enjoy, B, are very helpful to build a resume, to see who I am, to medical schools, etc. And like that was an important thing because it was like, okay, don't throw 110% of yourself into just getting A's because you cannot sustain that. You can't sustain any other activities. But you also, you know, it's like figure out how to balance those. And that was important to like test out and figure out and also recognize.
But talk about, so like with that kind of inner shift that you experience from feeling really shitty and losing your confidence and I can't figure it out, then you kind of had the summer to process and being the, as I call, the good annoying mama that I am, of some life lessons there, of just shifting your perspective of like, what do I make of the situation that is in my control? And then also just getting really intentional about, well, here's the future that I'm crafting. Like, what do I need to do? Like within all that, and I know you said it's hard to pinpoint, but that to me is kind of what I just described as like a process of reinvention, right? And what I'm going to kind of reflect it back to you. And I'd love for you to, like, even in this conversation, think about like what, because then just to break the plot line to everyone, your sophomore year, you kicked ass. You got all A's, you did great. It was the hardest. And for pre-med, it's known as the hardest year. Orgo, everyone listening,
nuts.
if you know,
It
and
was
it's
nuts.
like, yeah, it was, and you did it. You really, really did it. But it wasn't just about the grades. Like, I know I've said this to you and you've said this to us. You just felt much stronger, much more focused, much more like you found yourself. And I know you said it's hard to pinpoint, but I really I want you to dig in. Like, what, you've alluded to some of them, but like, what would you say was like the shift, the deepest inner shift that you made to go from that place of low confidence and getting a crappy result to a place where you kicked ass, like you brought your best?
I'm going to say something, and then I wonder if you're going to have a reflection on that that goes even deeper. I think at some point, probably nearing the very, very beginning of fall of sophomore year, maybe already taking classes. I think I might have already started. I had this like, I don't know, resurgence of energy that came from this feeling of like, I can do this. And that sounds so cliche, but like it really was. It was like, look, you've been a successful student before. You can do it again, even if it's in a different environment. Like you know who you are, you know what you want, make it happen. And I was like, I can make it happen.
I think, no, and I don't think it's cliche. And my reflection on that is, I think what you actually just brought up is a giant point that I'm so glad we're talking about, because what often happens, and it's happened to me and it's happened to a lot of people that I mentor and work with, they have, let's say, a successful career, right? And then something bad happens. They get fired. In my case, a company that I started failed. In your case, you got a bad grade. They get a bad review at work. They go through a terrible breakup. So something bad happens. And all of a sudden, they forget all the good things they were able to do before. They forget. It's like a lobotomy. All the hard work, all the resilience, all the giant progress they made. And that failure just becomes their identity. Like, I am a failed entrepreneur, or like, I literally just had one of the women I'm mentoring that I know I've talked to you about this generally, who had this incredibly successful career for 17 years as a teacher, ended up, taking burnt out, took a sabbatical, and really feels like I don't think I can be a teacher anymore because I burnt out. And so that one difficult thing tends to take over, right? And you've heard me talk about this your whole life. The brain has a negativity bias, right? So we remember the negative much more than the positive. And I think that's exactly what happened. And I love that you brought this up, that for a while, for a few months, that bad result, it became your all. You were like, oh my God, that's the freak out. Like, that's it. That's it. I'm not getting into medical school. I can't do this. And then just giving that some time and tapping into like, okay, let me look back at my life. You just said this, like, I've done this before. I have done hard things before. And I think the other thing, because I remember you and I talking about this, when you first took the SATs, you didn't do great. I forget what you got, but it wasn't great. And then you had a tutor and you worked really, really, really hard, and you had a spectacular SAT grade. Like, you almost had perfect SATs, which is like crazy to me as your mama, because I sucked on the SATs. And even though I take my Russian Jewish exemption because I was in the country for like 2 years still. And so we had this conversation that summer in the teachable mama moment of me trying to remind you, you have done poorly at something and were able to improve. And so I think what you just brought up is exactly that. You remembered, and not just remembered, you actively reminded yourself that, okay, this bad thing might have happened, but I've done hard things before. I've improved before. I know how to do this. And when you say that energy, that's the energy to me that we tap into when we connect to like our full authentic self. And your authentic self knows how to do hard things. It knows how to work hard. And that was the energy. And I think that's such a huge point for everyone to hear because, like I said, I work with, and I've gone through this. Like when something difficult happens that seems like almost outside of our control, like it happens to us, like you try and get a bad grade, or you get fired, or your company fails. It's very easy to forget all the amazing things you've done before. It's easy to forget all of your abilities. And I think that's a huge thing. And of course, in the back, I'm like revising the reinventability framework. This is how helpful this is. Because looking back at your past progress and successes and abilities is really, really important. So I want to just ask like one more question around, so you had this shift, you had this energy, you had this focus. What else, like, was there something else that you learned from that whole experience that helped you to move forward? Again, because you had a spectacular year last year, and like, not just in the grades. I just want to keep emphasizing that. This isn't just about the grades. Like all Papa and I were saying is like, wow, she's really in herself. Like, so is there something else that you learned from that huge reinvention?
The first words that want to come out of my mouth are like, it's hard. Like it's hard. And it was hard for me even this semester. Like the hardest thing was actually not beating myself up. Like, oh, I would have an assignment here or this or whatever, and I'm just like, oh my God, like I have to get 100%. I have to, and all my friends are like, relax, like it's okay. Because of the past semester, I'm like, it's not okay. Like if I let myself breathe, then I won't get what I need to get. That was really hard to not do. And I think that's an important thing once you're past this reinvention stage, to not allow this like little failure to sit on your shoulder and be like, if you let up, you're going to fail again. First of all, if you fail again, you fail again and you get out of it, and you already got out of it once and you'll get out of it again. The thing I kept thinking when you were talking, there's this quote, I don't know if you've heard it, it's cliche, but I love it. You've survived 100% of your worst days. You have survived all of anything that you've had to survive, and you're here now. And so another thing happens, you can survive that again. You have a 100% success rate currently. That's a pretty good success rate.
I love that. And I love what you just said about the failure on your shoulder, because in the words that I used in my work is it can really become part of the narrative, right? So the story that we tell ourselves determines everything. It determines our choices, decisions, the possibilities we envision for ourselves, what we think we're able to do. And so if we take that failure or something we screwed up and we make that our like a giant part of our narrative, unless I am, putting 20 hours a day into studying and don't breathe, unless I'm doing that, I'm going to fail. Like if you took that from that failure and made it part of your narrative, that'd be terrible, because I can guarantee you wouldn't have done well. So it's really important. I think what you just said is to create an empowering narrative, to learn from that failure and then create an empowering inner narrative story from that, instead of one that defeats you, right? And you just said what yours became. I can hear it. It's, I've done really hard things and I'm able to improve, and I'm able to do hard things without having to beat myself up or without having to be harsh on myself. And I think that's a huge, huge lesson. And so like, as a teacher of these things, I love that we're talking about it. As your mom, my heart is the size of, the galaxy at the moment, because I think it's such an important thing to be aware of, that, there's often this expression that things that happen don't have meaning. We give them meaning. I think it's 90% correct. I think some things just have inherent meaning, but you get to interpret, right, how the meaning you give to that experience, to all of it, to the failing at something, not doing as well as you wanted, to improving. That's completely within your control. And that's always, like I talk about, the biggest power, the greatest power we have is the power of choice. And the choice to say, well, this is how the meaning I'm going to give to this, right? And the meaning you're giving to this is, it was a really rough semester. You perhaps did not go, the other thing we've talked about is you didn't go 100%. You went 80% because you're really smart. And in high school, 80% was fine. You didn't get the grade you wanted. You freaked out. You were in a difficult place, but then you dug in. You remember that you can improve and do hard things, but you didn't choose to adopt the story that the only way I can improve and do great is if I don't sleep, don't eat, beat myself up all the time, right? Like, you had a choice to create a different story. And I think that's a huge, huge lesson. And, we always joke, right? Because Mia's planning to go to medical school. And I think we all know it's really, really hard. Medical school is hard. Residency is hard. And I always tell Mia, anything meaningful in life is hard. You just pick your hard, but it's hard. And I think it's like when I talk about reinvention, to me, this is like what you just said is the whole essence of it. It's growing into our fullest potential through action and through learning, right? And so, like, to me, just because I said it before, will you just, like, your experience and why I wanted to record this episode is this, to me, is this process of reinvention, right? Like, something bad happened, something difficult happened. You connected to your purpose. Your purpose was, for you, like, I want to go to medical school. It's something I really care about. Like, I want to be a doctor. You envision the future self you want to be, and that future self does well. She does her best. She gets good grades. She goes to good medical school. You created a empowering inner narrative. The inner narrative was, I can improve. I don't have to, kill myself to do it. I don't have to beat myself up. And then, most importantly, you took action. That, to me, is a huge thing. So can you just talk about, like, a few, however small, like, things that you did differently last year that allowed you to have a really great year? Again, not just in grades.
Okay. I'm thinking. I mean, I think I created a lot more systems for myself. Like, I use so many different scheduling reminder, like, literally I use Google Calendar. I have a physical whiteboard in my dorm. I use Todoist. I use there's something else I'm forgetting.
Well, you have
I
all your
use
school tools also, like,
right.
that nobody will know what they are.
Right,
but...
exactly. Like, Blackboard or whatever people know of. I use Moodle. Like, I have so many systems in place to stay organized and also to take those things out of my head. Because if I had to, like, the more I try to hold in my head that isn't somewhere externally, and I know I can rely on some, and I love modern technology for this, I can rely on some device to just be like, hey, do this thing, remember to do this thing. I love that. It takes that out of my head, and the more I can take out of my head, the better. Because then I have time, A, to work on things or do things or remember things that I can't put somewhere else. B, to enjoy my life, because you can't life without enjoying life. I couldn't. I don't know, maybe someone can.
I think we're going to need that. We're going to need that as a quote. We're going to copyright that to Mia. You can't life without enjoying life. I'm not being facetious. I love that. You can't life without enjoying life.
Without enjoying life. So that's my biggest thing. And you know me, and I need a lot of external things, and that has been a game changer. Like, literally write down all the things you need to know, all the things you need to do in as many places as possible. And then it's just everywhere. And then I don't have to think about it. And it's great. Because then I have time. I'm in like a dance club, and then I have time. I come home. I can see on my calendar that I have time to, like, rehearse our showcase and, like, stuff like that. And I don't have to sit. I also spend less time, like, each day planning, because I can plan ahead in the week. Like, weekends, I love Sundays. When I'm at college, love Sundays, because I do so much, like, administrative Mia work on Sundays. That was one of the big things that I changed, was just, like, I would always use, like, I used to use like one or two, but now it's like everything goes in the Google Calendar, everything goes on the whiteboard, everything goes in Todoist, everything goes in reminders, like everything is everywhere. And it's like I have another person that's just like, hey. And people have talked about, I've heard like when people have ADHD, you use like a buddy system where it's sort of like that, where you have this like either real or faux second person to kind of like guide you and make sure you're staying on task. And this is my buddy. Also,
I
big
really love
plug to
that.
Todoist, because I really like everything I do in there, and Google Calendar. Love
I
Google
love
Calendar.
Todoist too. Maybe I should reach out to them to sponsor this
Oh, you
podcast
should
because
tell
I
them.
think I introduced you. Avi and I
You did.
introduced you, I think, to Todoist. I love Todoist. I love this answer so much, babes, because like you created systems. Because, well, one, I love it for you, but I mean generally, because what I often find when I work with people is, again, something bad happens and it becomes this big like, oh, am I a terrible leader? Am I a terrible person? Am I a terrible student? Am I unable? Whereas the answer is often one, a bunch of stuff is outside of our control. Two, maybe you just didn't have the right systems in place.
Great.
And so to me, it's such a brilliant like example because internally you shifted, like you changed your story. You really like anchored in your priorities and your purpose. And you told yourself an empowering story, but externally you created more systems and that was really helpful. And so I think it's such an important lesson that, again, the human brain loves this, right? Like something bad happens, it loves to take that and grow it into our whole identity, right? I used to say this to you, you know, as a mama, right? Like, I don't know, I'd snap at you or something when you were little. You know, you were an angel. There was never a reason to snap at you for any no. But I'd snap at you and then I'd feel awful. And my whole like my story would be like, wow, I'm an awful mom. Whereas no, I just needed to get more sleep. Right. Like I need to take better care of myself.
A lot of time you need just more support, and that comes in so many different forms. And for me, more support with systems and like, I don't know, friends and things like that, but systems. That was my support.
And I'm sure you've heard me mention, but like a lot of folks, I don't say folks. I don't know why I just said folks.
Because we were talking about it yesterday.
Oh yeah. Yesterday we were talking about how like,
what do you like say, guys and folks and girls. Yes. So folks, that's why.
Yes. What do you like? Yeah. What do you say? Because we all say, hey guys, but like, why do we say that? Right. A lot of experts who teach habits and habit forming, like James Clear and others, they talk about that like motivation is not enough. I mean, you've heard me say this. Motivation is not enough. Wanting something is not enough. Caring about something is not enough. You need to take action. That's like my thing. You just need to, and you need to create systems to help you do it. And this is like the brilliant case study in that. And I love that we get to talk about it. We always have a listener question segment of the podcast. And I am thinking back through, I don't have a particular listening question for this, but I'm going to create one from so many emails that I get from my community, many of whom are students. I usually share those with you. But in any situation where people feel that they're just really overwhelmed, like I hear this all the time. Like I feel really overwhelmed. I know what I want to do, but I just don't think I can do it. It's like life is too overwhelming. And I want to ask you what your advice would be for someone who's just feeling really overwhelmed, and think back to how you felt when you were struggling that semester. Think back how you feel now. Like, what would your advice be to someone who like feels like not just overwhelmed? I don't just mean busy. I mean overwhelmed in a way that like a sense of loss of control. Like I feel like I'm like sinking in the sand. What would you say?
Number one, over everything, the advice I will always give, find a person who will pick up your plate for a second. Like, even if it's for 30 seconds, if they can lift something for you, and even if that means you sit down and talk to them for 10 minutes and like that's your lift, it's just, I mean, it's just like, never underestimate the value of having someone who can do that for you, or someone's multiple. Like, it's just really valuable. And like, for me, like I have like two very close friends, one at school, one not, who like are able to help me lift a little bit sometimes. That's number one always. Like, don't be afraid to lean on people. You're not a burden. They want to help you. They want you to feel better, and they love you, and they want to do that for you.
Even your parents. Sorry.
Even your parents, yes. Number two, a little bit tactically, like, look at your priorities. Is there something you can cut? Is there something you're doing that maybe was fun and now it's not fun because you have so many other things going on? Put it on pause and come back to it when you're not like flooded. Come back to it when you're swimming. That was like another thing that I did. Like, okay, what can we not do? For me, I love going to the gym. When you're freaking out about everything, it's like maybe actually, and for some people actually going to the gym, like that's good. I personally, if I go when I'm like too stressed, then I just spend the entire time there thinking about how I could be doing other things. So that's not a very good use of time. So like, then actually go spend the time doing the things you could be doing. Those are like two things I did. I don't know if you have some insight about what I've done that maybe I don't know. Because sometimes you say things, I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize I did that.
Yeah, well, it's good to have a mirror. I think those are two great suggestions. I do think that taking a step back and looking at what we talked about, but just to highlight it again, like taking a step back out of the situation, just a little bit like perspective, zooming out, and then reflecting back on your life, remembering other hard things you've done and other challenging things you've done, and just reconnecting to those strengths in yourself. I think that's a huge thing. And you did it, and I try to help you do it, and you did it. And I think that's a huge thing that people often we forget to do.
I think also related to that, like reconnecting with your belief in yourself. With your belief that like you can succeed, whatever that means for you, that you can achieve, that you can do this, that, etc. Because you lose that when you fail. You fail, and then you forget that you had faith in yourself to get to the finish line. And so that's again, it's all sort of related, like remembering why you're doing it and stepping back and being like, okay, what's important to me and how can I achieve it, and how can I remember that I know how to achieve it, and then I know I can get there, and that I trust myself to do it.
Yeah. And then I also think, again, we've talked about this, but I think it's so important just to highlight, like for someone who's feeling like that, they're sinking in the sand, like they're losing like they just feel like they're out of control. They can't make anything in their life work. They're overwhelmed. That story that you're telling yourself is really important. Like if the story you keep telling yourself that, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed, I can't control anything. If you keep telling yourself that story, the brain has a confirmation bias. It's just going to find more reason. Like, yeah, you're 100% right, Nataly. Look at all these other things. And so just the importance of stepping back and being really intentional about your narrative, right? And that's what you did too. But just being intentional, like, and this isn't about ignoring that you might have screwed something up. It's actually really important to be like courageously honest with yourself, but then choosing, like, this is the essence of self-compassion. Self-compassion is recognizing that you're a human being, recognizing that you can't do things perfectly because no one can, and then supporting yourself to move forward with less struggle. And part of that is choosing the right narrative. So instead of, I can't seem to get anything done well, I'm completely overwhelmed, I don't have control over my life, saying, wow, it's been a really difficult time. I've had a really difficult time, but I've done hard things before. This is really important for me to move forward. I want to be the future self who's thriving. And here's the small ways I'm going to do it. So I think choosing the narrative is also really important. And like one last thing I'll say of seeing you go through that, other than this was one of the hardest and most beautiful things that Papa and I observed, and we talk about it to this day, because it is awful, 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 worst thing ever as a parent to see your child struggle and not be able to jump in, right? That's why, when you were little, it was just much easier because the struggle was like, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, my shoelace broke, my crayon got me dirty. And we're like, oh, I can fix all of that. I got you. And it's the hardest thing to watch your child struggle and not be able to help. And it is the most beautiful thing to watch your child grow. Like in front of our eyes, you grew in an amazing way. And I always hesitate saying this, but I'm in a way really happy it happened. Well, and I think you understand what I mean. I'm happy you went through that because it was the first time academically and personally you struggled with something significantly. And the only way we can grow is we have to hit the limit of our limit. We have to hit the limit. And so I just want to end with that it was the hardest thing ever and the most amazing, beautiful thing to watch. And that's why I wanted to have a conversation with you about it, because I think we all as human beings go through what you went through all the time. And this isn't a college thing. This is life, right? We do things, we hit our limit, we're being invited to grow. We can either choose to grow as you did, or we can choose not to. We can choose to sit in the struggle, we can retreat. And I think it's like, this to me is the essence of what life is, right? Is to grow into your fullest potential, but it isn't like some one and done, right? We do it through these continued reinventions. So I love that we got to talk about it. Thank you, Mia, very much for coming on the podcast.
You are very welcome.
Mia, just so everyone know, if you're watching this, Mia is in the bedroom. This is my office. There's a hallway right here. And then behind that wall is Mia. But we thought we'd make it very, official.
We're very sophisticated.
Very sophisticated. That's all we have for the podcast. I'm going to not say this was my favorite episode because I have so many amazing guests joining me. But
it was your favorite.
But actually it was.
But yeah, it was your favorite.
But I am, Mia's 20, which is surreal to say because I don't feel that much older than 20. Being a mom, I've written a lot about this, is the most incredible and the most difficult experience, just like this experience that we talked about. But to have your daughter come on your podcast and talk about something so significant and in such a fueling for others way is a big gift. So thank you, Mia, for that gift. And thank you for joining us. To our listeners. If you heard something that connected to you, was meaningful to you, I'd love to hear from you. You can always send me an email to Nataly, Nataly @happier.com. If you have any questions that you want me or my guest to answer on the upcoming episodes about change, reinvention, failure, confidence, anything around that, send me an email to that address and just put podcast in the subject line. And if you are enjoying this podcast, I always ask you to please rate and review it. It helps other awesome humans like you discover it and benefit from it. And with that, that's all we have for today. I will see and hear you, or be in your ear, on our next episode.